Greetings and welcome to room 303 in Junior English, and we turn now in our hymnals to page number 1, unit number 1, A Gathering of Voices, Literature of Early America, from beginnings to 1800. Now, we are at the very beginning of Junior English, and of course our volume number 1, and the challenge for us is to talk about when does America begin, which is why notice you don't have an actual date for the beginning of this unit, you just have the word beginnings, and then we're going to work to 1800. There is an Iroquois hymn that's quoted here on page right before page 1. Let's look at that. I come again to greet and thank the League. I come again to greet and thank the kindred. I come again to greet and thank the warriors. I come again to greet and thank the women. My forefathers, what they established. My forefathers, hearken to them. Let's go ahead now and turn and look at the snapshot of the period. And all we're doing now at level 1 is just taking bullet point notes as we get ready for our study and our analyses of a number of these different titles. We want to set ourselves up to that study. And so let's kind of read through this. And all we're doing is taking notes. When you find bold information, dates, that kind of thing, we'll want to write that information down as we take notes. All right? First of all, just kind of an overview or snapshot of the period. In 1492, North America was already populated by several hundred Native American tribes. More than 12,000 years before Christopher Columbus reached North America, nomadic peoples had migrated across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia and settled across the continent. These people spoke different languages and had very different cultures, but the Europeans called them all by one name, Indians. In the centuries after Columbus, more and more Europeans ventured to the New World. Among them were explorers, fortune seekers, missionaries, and those fleeing religious persecution. There were also enslaved Africans who made the journey across against their will. Individuals from these groups wrote accounts of their experiences, creating the first written literature of North America. By 1699, European colonies dotted the entire eastern seaboard and extended as far west as New Mexico. In 1776, 13 of those colonies declared their independence from England. Over on page 3, you've got a map there of the peoples of North America from 1490 to 1750. European exploration of North America quickly led to settlement and colonization. The Spaniards settled in Florida, then sent Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries to California and Texas. The French settled in Maine and along the Gulf of Mexico, while the Dutch established New Amsterdam, New York, and communities reaching south to Delaware. English Puritans settled Virginia, New England, and Pennsylvania, and later took over the Dutch and French colonies in Florida. This influx of Europeans had a lasting impact on Native Americans, whose lifestyles and territories were increasingly restricted. And then the integration of knowledge and ideas based on the information in this map that you're looking at. What can you predict about the interactions among these various groups? And think about the ways in which different groups might form alliances, react to newcomers, or protect their territories. And then you'll want to be ready to explain your predictions. Let's turn now to page 4 as we work through now these pages of introduction. Early America beginnings to 1800. And as we hit then these headings, you'll want to write down 1 or 2 things under each of these headings that are of importance for your notes. The first Americans. No one knows when or how the first Americans arrived in what is now the United States. It was probably between 12,000 and 70,000 years ago. The rich cultural presence of Native American tribes spanned the continent, and Native American oral literature, myths, legends, songs, begins our American literary heritage. By oral literature, we mean not written down, spoken. Colonists from Europe did not reach the North American continent until the late 1500s. The Europeans who settled at St. Augustine, Florida in 1565 and at Jamestown, Virginia in 1607 learned agriculture and woodcraft from the Native Americans. They learned about maize and squash and bark canoes. These men and women were tough and hardy but without the help of those who knew the wilderness intimately, they would probably not have survived. The next heading, Puritans, Pilgrims, Planters. After a terrifying ocean voyage, the Mayflower sailed into harbor at Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620. You want that date in your notes. Its passengers were religious reformers who had tried to purify the Church of England but thought that they had a better chance in the New World. These Puritans, now called Pilgrims, gave every ounce of energy and often their lives to build a city upon a hill, a model community based on the Bible. Puritanism gradually declined, but around 1720, a revival called the Great Awakening brought some new converts. Genuine old-fashioned Puritanism never reawakened, although the Puritan ethic of hard work and self-discipline remained a basic American value. The southern colonies differed from New England in climate, crops, social organization, and religion. Large plantations, not small farms, were the core of the economy, and slaves, who had been first brought to Virginia in 1619, were the core of the plantations. We want that date down. So slaves will come to Virginia in 1619. Planters thought of themselves as hard-working but aristocratic, and their way of life was more sociable and elegant than that of the Puritans. Top of page 5, another heading, The Age of Reason. The Enlightenment shocked Puritan beliefs, inspired by brilliant scientists such as Galileo and Newton and philosophers such as Voltaire and Rousseau. The thinkers of this time valued science, logic, and reason over faith. They believed that people are good by nature and capable of building a better society. They spoke of a social contract that forms the basis of government, an idea that laid the groundwork for the American Revolution. Next heading, the birth of the nation. Taxes, taxes, and more taxes imposed by Britain kept beating down American colonists. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and the Tea Act, the coercive acts by 1774, the colonists had had enough. They met in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress, and in 1775, minute, Lexington and Concord fired the shot heard round the world, quote unquote. 6 long years of bloodshed followed at Bunker Hill, Saratoga, and many other sites. Colonialists fought alongside French and African American soldiers until the British finally surrendered at Yorktown in 1781. Even then, the United States disagreed fiercely among themselves until the Constitution and Bill of Rights were ratified. Heroes of the Revolution, Washington and Adams, became the first 2 presidents. Thomas Jefferson, a hero of the Enlightenment, became the 3rd. By 1800, the United States of America had firmly established its political identity. It would soon establish its cultural identity as well. We've got 3 key historical themes about creating a nation. Let's make sure they're in our notes. 1, at the bottom of page 5. Europeans came to America to create a city upon a hill, an ideal community founded on moral and religious values. 2, colonists, with the help of Native Americans, learned to make the wilderness productive on both small farms and large plantations. 3, the United States arose from Enlightenment ideas that people are basically good and can use reason to create a better society. All right, let's turn to page 6, essential questions across time. In your textbook, you're going to have these questions that will be asked and sought to be answered in all 6 of the units that we will be studying together. The first question, what is the relationship between literature and place? I would have you write that question down quickly in your notes. We'll be paying attention to these questions, and I want you to know them, okay? What was the New World's natural environment? Let's address that on page 6. About 1 century before the colonists arrived in North America, many people thought that crossing the Atlantic Ocean meant sailing off the edge of the earth. Instead, the first European colonists found a continent more magnificent, strange, and dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. First heading, place of wonder. The colonists discovered long shores and sandy beaches backed by vast forests. They found ranges of mountains and fertile valleys and an astounding number of plants, variety of plants, fish, birds, and animals. Nature in America was built on an immense scale. The wilderness looked endless. Nevertheless, for all its intimidating size and wild variety, this new place had one overwhelmingly satisfying quality. It was not Europe. Next heading, at one with the place. From the beginning, then, America was a place apart. I would write that down. From the beginning, then, America was a place apart. But it was not so in the eyes of the Native Americans. In fact, the most Native American cultures, the people belonging to the land. The deep forest and wide plains were simply to be used and cared for by the human beings who lived in them temporarily. The lands and waters were life-giving environments, and the animals were part of the community. The facts of nature could be harsh, but they were also to be celebrated in myths, rituals, and songs. Nature was not to be feared as an enemy or overcome as an obstacle, but honored as the source of life. Page 7. What were the colonists' attitudes towards the New World environment? For the colonists, the people did not belong to the land. Quite the opposite. The land belonged to people. And this land was to be claimed by Britain, France, and Spain. So we'll write that down. The major difference between native peoples and the Europeans that arrived was native peoples saw that they thought they belonged to the land, and for the Europeans it was quite the opposite. And we have three major powers, Britain, France, and Spain, all believing they can own the land. The land was measured, divided, bought, sold, and governed as the property of European kings and trading companies. The Puritans, filled with religious zeal, may have wanted to build a city upon a hill, but the hill would still belong to the King of England. Next heading, dream versus reality. During the 17th century, the colonists' attitude toward the American environment was a blend of dream and reality. The dream was to create a theocracy, an earthly community governed by religious principles. The reality was to avoid starving to death or falling prey to cold, disease, or animals. The colonists saw the continent's raw beauty, rich resources, and awe-inspiring possibilities. They also felt every day the hard facts of staying alive. The next heading, independent place and people. By the 18th century, Europeans had gained a more secure foothold in America. Tree by tree, they had tamed a portion of the wilderness and built towns, roads, schools, and churches. They began to worry less about survival and more about self-government. They began to ask, we live in an independent place, so why aren't we an independent people? The effects of the Enlightenment began to set in, and people realized that they could belong to themselves rather than to a monarch. The spirit of self-reliance that had faced down the wilderness was the same spirit that would face down European kings. The place itself had taught Americans how to be Americans. And then in the box there on page 7, The American Experience, A Living Tradition, Anne Bradstreet and John Berryman. In the 1950s, American poet John Berryman responded powerfully to the life and work of Puritan poet Anne Bradstreet, who had lived 300 years earlier. We'll study Anne Bradstreet here in a while. In his long poem of praise called Homage to Mistress Bradstreet, he reveals his understanding of her struggle to survive and to be a writer in 17th century America. He imagines her winter ordeals and asserts that he is more sympathetic to her poetry than was her busy husband, Simon. And then you have a picture there, and then from Homage to Mistress Bradstreet, these lines. Outside the New World, winters in grand dark white air lashing high through the virgin stands. Foxes down, foxholes sigh. Surely the English heart quells stunned. I doubt if Simon, then this blast that sea spares from his rigor for your poetry more. We are on each other's hands who care. Both of our worlds unhanded us lie stark. Thy eyes look to me mild. Out of maze and air your body's made and moves. I summon, see, from the centuries, it. Okay, let's turn to page 8, continuation with questions. How did attitudes towards nature show up in literature? The close relationship between Native Americans and nature showed up in myths and legends. In these stories, people communicate with mountains and rivers, people and animals talk with each other, and sometimes even change into each other. Human beings and nature live in harmony. That's what you want to write down. Human beings and nature live in harmony in the old Native American stories. When the earliest explorers searched the continent, their responses to the land appeared in their journals and in the reports and letters they sent back home. Cabeza de Vaca recorded the natural wonders of the New World. William Bradford's Of Plymouth Plantation, the finest written work of the first European Americans, is filled with detailed descriptions of creating a colony in a place so delightful and so dangerous. Next heading, Errand into the Wilderness. America's first literary family, Richard Increase and Cotton Mather, saw the environment from a religious point of view. Their writings describe a mission to combat evil in an uncivilized place. In time, this idea of the wilderness as a dark place of evil profoundly affected other writers. Forests and wild places play a large role physically and symbolically in the writings of American writers who would come later, including Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Mark Twain. Next heading, Place and Nation. As the colonies developed, the power of reason began to make the continent a more hospitable place. Technology improved and agriculture flourished. In letters from an American farmer, Jean de Corvier even used the imagery of covering plants to emphasize the important idea that living in this particular place turned Europeans into Americans. Quote, in Europe, they were as so many useless plants. They withered and were mowed down by want, hunger, and war. But now, by the power of transplantation, like all other plants, they have taken root and flourished, end quote. The very name of the new nation reveals the influence of place. The United States of America is made of separate, distinct places, states united into one, a federal republic. By the way, do note that you have some essential vocab words there on page 8 that could end up on the exam. Definitely put them in your notes. All right, let's work with page 9. What makes American literature American? American literature naturally shares the basic characteristics of all literature: characters, plots, settings, images, and themes. However, American literature is much more than literary works written by Americans. It also embodies certain ideas, invokes certain places, and tells stories of certain kinds of characters. There are qualities that distinguish American literature and make it a unique cultural expression. Let's look at the first heading question. What is a theme and how does it find expression in literature? It's what we will call our 2A level of reading, theme messages. A theme is the central idea, message, or insight that a literary work reveals. A theme is not the subject of a work, but rather the insight that the work reveals about the subject. A work reveals its themes through characters' words and actions, through details of setting and plot, through imagery, and even through language and style. Next question. What were early American themes? 3 themes dominate early American writing. Let's list them in our notes. The first one, wildness or wilderness. Writers revealed insights into the nature and meaning of the wilderness by the details they used to describe it and by the stories they told of their physical, political, and spiritual struggles with it. By the way, let's just jump over to page 9 in the corner there, The American Experience, Developing American English, Our Native American Heritage by Richard Leader. Read with me. If you had been a settler in North America, you would have found many things in your new environment unknown to you. The handiest way of filling voids in your vocabulary would have been to ask local Native Americans what words they used. Colonists began borrowing words from Native Americans almost from the moment of their first contact, and many of those shared words have remained in our everyday language. They are part of what makes American literature American. Anglicizing. Pronouncing many of the Native American words was difficult for the colonists, so they often shortened or simplified the words. For example, you have a long word in Native American that became squash, right? Otok became woodchuck. You can see where raccoon came from, and the smelly skunk is transformed as well. The North American menagerie brought more new words into the English language, including caribou and chipmunk and moose and muskrat, all coming from different native tribes. The poetry of place names, some of our loveliest place names that we have, Shenandoah is mentioned here, as well as several others, began life as Native American words. Such names are the stuff of poetry. Colonists freely used words of Indian origin to name states, half of all of them, cities, towns, mountains, lakes, rivers, and ponds. Now to continue, what were the early American themes? Of the first was wilderness on page 10. The second is community. Let's write it down. In public writing, such as pamphlets and newspapers, colonists and patriots conveyed the central message that America was a unique combination of community and independence. Finally, individualism. In history and memoir, and in everything from laws to lyric poems, writers made clear that self-reliance and individualism are fundamental American values. I would write that down. Self-reliance and individualism are fundamental American values. Okay? Let's look at the next one. Here's our question. What is uniquely American about those themes? The place, the first heading. Americans recognized that they were in a unique place, a new world, only a small part of which they'd ever seen. Nothing in their European experience had prepared them for the splendors and the terrors of the American wilderness. Sometimes America seemed to be the Garden of Eden, a newly created place of natural wealth. Sometimes it seemed to be an enemy, a punishment, or a source of fear and death. These themes entered into the American literary imagination. The past. When Americans wrote, they were aware of the many traditional European subjects and themes that were now of no importance to them. After all, there had been no Middle Ages or Renaissance in America. Europeans had medieval romances that told tales of knights and chivalry. Americans did not. Europeans had Shakespeare's tragedies of kings and princes. Americans did not. Europeans had a heritage of elegant and witty writing. Americans had a plain, straightforward way of writing. Americans did have histories and journals, prayers and sermons, speeches and essays. They even had some poems, but all of these